pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's please stand for a moment of silent meditation. Thank you.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda? Ms. Prokop?
Here.
Mr. Strittmeyer? Mr. Tavano?
Yeah.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Amito?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, the review of programs and placement of students with disabilities, and collective bargaining under the TEL law, MTA, CSEA, NASA, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strittmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
We will return at 7 o'clock. Turn this over to our superintendent of schools, Dr. Penny.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, Board of Education. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Good evening, audience. So we have several presentations this evening. We're going to start with our one thing by Dr. Ebony Green, who is the Executive Director of Equity and Access. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the One Thing presentation, this is something that we've committed to this year to keep a focus on instruction, to share with the Board of Education and the community the various things that are happening in the district as it pertains to instruction. And so Dr. Green will take about 5 minutes or so to go over her one thing for this year.
Good evening, Madam President, Board of Education members, Dr. Lydia. The Division for Equity and Access has two one things, actually. So the first one thing really focused and set around creating a professional development plan that will build and preventative and restorative practices within the district. And so in an effort to increase the capacity across the board, based on looking at data and really looking to figure out what are some of the concerns which play into the classroom, into our school buildings. It directed us to a place where currently there aren't a lot of supports in terms of how do we build professional capacity to really understand different things that can be utilized within the classroom realm, so that teachers and other staff members can feel supported in making sure that they're able to work and engage with students and also teach students to have appropriate behaviors and redirection of those behaviors. And so the one thing for us was over the course of this year to create a 3-year plan that would be inclusive of professional development opportunities that would support our staff in order for our staff to support our students, and then also different ways to work within our school buildings to support our students to build their own emotional capacity. So as a result, the quarterly targets would be that as a result of implementation of the creation and implementation of the professional development series, to decrease suspension 10% each year for 3 years. The second one thing from Equity and Access, was to capture a baseline. So with the division being new, part of the work was to look to see what were the current achievement levels that our students were particularly captured in subcategories. And so the goal here was to create an equity team that would essentially create and implement an equity report card or scorecard would essentially set as our baseline. So within this document, it would capture how our students across the board are performing, and it would particularly set out to look in 4 particular ways. So it would look at attendance, discipline, college and beyond, so graduation, and then our actual literacy and math rates for all of our students across the districts, and then also looking at our subpopulations, inclusive of gender and race as 2 particular pieces. And so by the end of this year, the equity scorecard will then be utilized as our district capture, and then moving forward it would be something that was created building-based so that we can start to look at how we distribute resources and how we support our sub-populations within every school building in the district. Any questions?
Board members, any questions or comments?
So I would say this is obviously in alignment with the board's focus and commitment and goals. And towards the end of the year, we'll be sharing with you sort of what that district view looks like, right? So thank you, Dr. Green.
Thank you.
Okay, the next presentation involves enrollment study overview, and our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Ed Forget, will be giving a quick presentation based on an analysis of the study.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, board members. So in the fall, we entered into an agreement with Western Suffolk BOCES to complete a 10-year student enrollment projection. And we all know that the purpose of collecting and gathering data is so that we can use it to inform decisions that need to be made. When we think about curriculum and instruction, if you provide an assessment to a student, you get that assessment data back, and you're making instructional changes to what you're doing to support that particular student so that you can generate a positive outcome in the life of the child. So with this particular enrollment study, over the course of the next 10 years, based on the data that was collected and the statistical analysis done by Western Suffolk BOCES, between years 2016 and 2026, where we do see a decline in enrollment. There are a lot of reasons for that particular projection. If you reflect back a couple of years ago, we had the Capital Area School Development Associates come in and do an enrollment study, and they also projected that the enrollment would be going down over the course of the 10-year period. Similar to that particular study, there are things that can be done in the school district to address it. One of the items in an enrollment study is they look at the patterns and trends of the parents and the families that are moving in and moving out, the migration rate. They look at are there transition periods where students tend to be moving out at faster rates than others. For this particular study, it was at all grade levels. K was pretty solid. Students pretty much stayed at K. It was less prevalent at the high school. Once they were in the high school, they stayed in the high school in order to complete their graduation requirements. But from grades 1 through 6, and then grades 7 and 8, we did see transitions of students moving out. Can you move to the next one, John? So what was some of the data that was shared in this particular report? Well, the population, not the enrollment in the district, the population in the geographic area that makes up the Newburgh and Orange City School District has increased between 2010 and 16. So the community is on an increase. However, the age structure has shifted. The percentage of preschool children decreased between 2010 and 15, while the percentage of residents increased at 65 years or older. So we're seeing an increase in 65 plus, but a decrease at the younger school age child. Births have dropped over the past several years. Between 2002 and 2015, we've gone from 1,033 to 812 births within the geographic area of the Newburgh University School District. And what are some of those causes? So, I'm not going to read to you the entire report. I just kind of summarized some of those things. Individuals that are entering their early 20s to mid-20s are waiting before they start families. They're waiting to purchase homes, and there's a reason for it. They don't have the funding to do it. Lower starting salaries, significant student loan debt, challenges that the young adults face with higher rent costs and saving money for the down payment required to purchase a home. That's having an impact on the birth rates. That's across the nation. Many millennials are delaying marriage and childbearing. The age of the first birth has increased from 24.9 to 26.4. Those 2 years, you talk about a 2-year span, think about what that does to your early education program, into your intermediate, into your middle level. It has an impact on it. And even just the birth rates, look at the drastic change from, in 2016, the age of a woman having a baby has shifted, and it's not at the same level that it once was. So the population of the students under age 5 in Newburgh in 1990 was 8.6% of the population, and in 2015 we're dropping to 6.7. So you're seeing this trend in decrease, and you're seeing where it is. The age segment, look at the changes between 2000 and 2016. In 2000, when you look at the total population, 8% of that total population was between 0 and 4 years of age. 6.7 now. And again, I'm not going to read it to you, but look at the growth in the 65 and over, 11.9% to 12.5. We have some housing. Some of the people that I've spoken to over the past couple of weeks have said, how is it possible that we're going down? How is there a decline in the enrollment when all of these housing units are being built and all these condo units are being built in the community? It's not saying that there aren't people buying and purchasing them. It's the fact that the birth rate is affecting it. So they're, again, waiting till a later time in life. And then when you look at the non-public enrollment, 5% of our, this has been pretty stable over the course of the past several years, 5% of our population is enrolled in non-public schools. So, Jim Butterworth taught me a long time ago, when you're provided with data, don't just take the data and say this is it. Take the data and do something about it. So when you look at this data, what are some of the decisions that we can make to create a school district that entices people to want to move here, to want to educate their children here? And I think those are some of the things that senior staff has been working on and having conversations around. So when you look at the early elementary program, how do we hook our parents? How do we do what's right for kids at the early elementary program that make them want to stay all the way through? We have a strong high school. We've always had a strong high school. We have a wealth of programs for our families. How do we get these families to stay elementary to middle to high? So over the next couple of years, and one of the other things we're cautious of with an enrollment study is not to put a lot of weight into the entire 10 years to make sure that we're looking at the data for the first 5, because that's cleaner data, that's more accurate data. You can't project totally out 10 years, but you can really take a look at the first 5. And those are some of the things that we're doing through this particular project.
Questions or comments from the board?
I looked through the enrollment study kind of seriously. It looks like that we have decline after grade 1 and after grade 7. What can we do with that data to help us to pinpoint what we can do to keep those kids in the district and then possibly help with some of this decline?
So I think some of the things that we're doing, Dr. Padilla has already put in place. He's put in an early education initiative. He's put in a direction that we really build the foundational literacy in students from pre-K to grade 2. That is in our Vision 2020 plan, and that is something that we're working solidly on. Can we improve upon it? Absolutely. The more solid you build that foundation instructionally for a student, the better off that they're going to be as they move through the system.
What about grade 7?
Middle schools, so what we're going to see, if those numbers are accurate, what you're going to see is you're going to see increases at the middle level because the bubble is coming through the upper elementary grades into the middle level. So Dr. Padilla and I have already started what's called the middle school redesign. We are in the process of taking a look at the way we do scheduling. Both of our middle school principals are attending the New York State Middle School Association meetings, which allows them to meet and collaborate with every middle school principal across the state that's attending those meetings to learn effective practices from across the state. And over the course of the next couple of months, Dr. Padilla and I will be meeting with a team from a team from Heritage and a team from South to talk about where we move this particular middle level program.
I'll just add that we recognize that the middle school program needs attention, right? And so we've given very appropriate resources and attention to the early primary years. We've done really well at the high school, and so we've kind of bookended the approach, and we're right at a point where we really need to do a real redesign of middle school. And so that's a plan and a proposal we're hoping to share with you towards the later spring, if not early summer.
Mr. Menuda.
Does this data include those children, students, and parents who send their children to our schools? Not just those that live here or born here, but from out of the district. So in other words, if someone wants to pay to have their student come into our district, does that data include those individuals?
It would be included in the enrollment. But I honestly don't believe we have too many of those individuals. I would have to pull that data with Mr. Kern.
So one way to increase our enrollment would be to entice those outside the district to want to be here in that sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've got a really, really great opportunity to do that when you look at the CTE program. Expand that CTE program, build that CTE program, entice our local school districts to come here.
Yes, Madam President, I'd be curious, as when people leave deployment or leave areas, they do exit interviews, but is there any opportunity for us to talk to people who do move away and try to impact it? They said, you know, it's an educational system, or it is the middle school, or it is something where what we're doing or not doing in our school district. Is that the reason why you left at that point in time? I mean, to me, it would give us more information if people are leaving because of that. Because I find hard to believe we have some great offerings at the upper level. So I'd be curious to see if that is part of the reason why people do move away.
We'd be happy to consider a focus group. I can work with Mrs. Moriarty on that.
Mr. Steinmeier.
People that I've talked to that are leaving are saying the taxes are too high. You just can't deal with it anymore. They're moving north or they're moving south. So it's just killing them.
I think that's addressed in the report too. That's a statewide. I think they identified in the report that that's happening statewide as well with the migration rate. Even though you have people coming in, you've got more families going out, and they did identify that specifically in the report.
Mr. Menuda.
So to that end, I don't know that we want to microanalyze why people are moving out and that it's district-oriented. I think there's so many factors why people are moving away, and taxes and high taxes in the state being one of them. So I don't want to, put the flashlight on us, because I don't think that's the case. I think we should look at it, but I don't think that's the case.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Forger, I just want to thank you for providing this information to the community and to the board. I'll quickly share that this information was discussed at our last capital bond facilities meeting. And so we have scheduled another date that we'll be sharing. And if I can pull it up quickly, I'll say it publicly now, but it will also be in the weekly for the Board of Education. So obviously this information is pertinent, and it's something that we'll have to give consideration to as we continue our planning. And so we'll continue to analyze the data and retool and refine the capital bond projects. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put it in the weekly. I'm afraid if I say it, it might be wrong. It's either February 2nd or 9th. So we have the 2nd or the 9th for the next meeting. Yeah, if I pull it up, I'll share it. It's either one of those 2 days. So the next presentation will be by our Assistant Super Finance, Mr. Kearns, who will be giving a mid-year financial projection on our current budget.
Good evening, Madam President, Dr. Padilla, members of the board. The projection tonight is based on, we're halfway through the fiscal year, but we're only 40% through the school year, which runs on the 10-month and ends on June 30th. Next slide. Keep it the same format, just kind of shorten it up a little bit with the different funds that we have. I'll talk about the other funds before I get to the general fund. School lunch fund, we're going to be looking at a profit of about $300,000 this year. This is the early projection on that. In the library, we're showing about $150 going on that. We do have to talk a little bit later with the library with an upgrade to the fire alarm system that we discussed at Buildings and Grounds and brought up later in the year here. Special aid, capital, and debt service are flow-through funds. We look to break even on all of those. We do have 3 projects right now going to the capital fund. The Promethean boards, which are all installed, we're just about ready to send the final cost reports up to the state to get the reimbursement. We are working on the backbone structure. We're also looking to put forward a camera or a phone set that's already gone to the state, and we're hoping to hear from an approval on that. The debt service fund is covered separately outside of the general fund. What we have in there right now is about is $12,375,000. Of that money, $692,000 of that is actually money in the debt service from prior projects. The rest of the money is in there for the to pay back the state. We have a state aid give back. We put money aside back in last year. We still have to put a few more dollars aside, and we'll talk about that when we get into the general fund. General fund, we're projecting about a $5.3 million balance at the end of the year. When you figure that it's a almost a $269 million budget, we're coming in around 2% of the budget, which is, in the business world, that's really cutting it close on that. So I think we've turned the corner. We're starting to budget closer to the actual numbers that are out there. We are very close in our revenues. You see the revenues is down by about $83,000 in the revenue, and on the expense side, we're looking to cut about $5.3 million in expenses in the year. Some of the things we can do with that, we'll talk about that real quick, is that we can have one-time purchases, we can pre-purchase items for next year, or we can put money into reserve funds. One of the things we had talked about is more money into a capital reserve in order to cut back on some of the expenses to the project coming up. What has happened during the year? The tax collection, next slide, dear John. Well, leave it on dear John, I'll just talk about everything in the next slide. Leave it on the, leave it on the other. This way you can see what's going on. Tax collection, just to kind of give you an idea, we're 1% higher this year at this time than we were last year. We brought about 73% of the tax levy is in versus 72% last year. But in the first quarter report, we talked about that the state aid runs were not in for the 17-18 years. They came in December, and we were pleasantly surprised to see a little bit more aid. But a week later, we got a letter from the state saying that they've gone through and taken a look at some other state audits. I think they're up to the 11-12 year now. They're running a little bit behind. And we have a little over $1 million takeaway back from that. Takeaways come in the year that it happens. Unfortunately, the money that we look to get from this are putting onto a list, and roughly it's running about 6 years before we start seeing money on that. So that's already figured into the projected revenue on that side of the board. And we also projected into the revenue is the $1.5 million that we need to put back into debt service in order to pay the other state aid giveaway. So we're trying to make sure that the future boards aren't put into a position that they have to find money in order to pay back something that happened back in 2004. Caveat on the side here, we are working with Senator Larkin and Assemblyman Scartato on legislation for this year, and also working with a panel of other districts in the state that are in the same boat that we are in. There's 14 other districts that have state aid, building aid taken away from them, and we're looking to get special legislation. I thought we were going to be the largest district, but we come in second place. So, and we didn't even come close to first place, which was almost $30 million.
Questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Stringer.
What's the status of the state audit that was completed in July?
This is on hold. We have not heard back from the Comptroller's office as to what the final draft will be. They send it back to us, and we have 30 days to comment before they go final with that. The state has, in years past, not put any budgets, any audits out within a 60-day window of the budget vote. So if it doesn't happen within the next month, I don't think it's going to happen until fall.
And the follow-up question, on the reserve funds, I thought that we were at or limits on those as far as
No.
percentages?
We're going to go down to the, we're at the limit for the unappropriated fund balance, which is 4%, but it's based on this year's budget. That's not even listed up here because that's a item that's in the financials. These are the reserve funds that the board has made, that we are able to put money into the reserves. The unemployment insurance, this is in case we do have unemployment reserves. We're not even anywhere near where we need to be we're not at the maximum for that, but I feel comfortable with the money that's in there based on the history of the district and unemployment. Unless we're going to have a large layoff in the next 2-3 years, I think we're in good shape here. Workers' compensation, this reserve is based on an actuarial report. We are self-insured for workers' comp. If we had to give it up and go to a funded policy, we would have to pay out. This is what we have on the actuarial side of the house. Retirement, this is for the ERS. This is money that we can use to offset the fluctuation in the ERS balance that we have, our bill that we have every year. Tax certiorari's, these are the assessments that are argued before a judge. You've seen there's one on tonight that we have to pay back. The money does come out of the reserve account. We did create and fund fully a capital reserve project of $10 million. The additional money in there is the interest that was earned in the year. Employee benefits liability, this is retirement for, we pay out for the retirement incentives and items like that. We do have a reserve for that. We do move money in and out of that every year for, depending on the bills we do have to pay. And debt service is this is the actual reserve that we have out there. Of that, $8.6 million is going to the payback of the state aid payback, which is like $10.2 million, so we're short about $1.5 million. And the other $962,000 is money left over from other projects. We're going to be using this money in order to help finance the next capital project, because we can use this money for principal, not interest in the next project. So it's already been approved.
Is it a thought to take some of the $5.2 million and give it back to the taxpayers?
That's not my call. I would recommend against it and using it towards the capital project to bring down the items there, or to use it to offset one-time purchases for the district and to being able to be ready for some of the things that we need to, looking forward to do. I would not use it for recurring expenses, or one-time, or putting it into reserves to use at a later time.
I have a question. Since we have that 5.2, really 5.3 projected balance, what are the categories? What are the columns that we have, and I know it's only 2%, that we've over budgeted for? Because if there are things that we can buy now, like resources for teachers, paper, things that they can use, it's not $5 million. So I'd like to see that done.
We have items that we'd like to work into. Dr. Padilla has asked us to put together a plan for a one-to-one initiative to go forward into the district. There'll be Chromebooks or laptops for the students. We also do need looking at purchasing equipment for the teachers in order to enhance the Promethean boards that we put into the district here. So these are all one-time purchases that will get into the schedule to go on in for future planning.
So you have no idea like what particular category was over budgeted?
It's a little here and a little there. It's going down, and kind of give you an idea of some of the assumptions we make. Health insurance, we know it runs from January 1st to December 31st. We know what the first half of the year is. We guess. We make an assumption or an educated guess of what we think the increase of health insurance is. We've missed the mark by about $785,000 as of today. We just got the bills in for January. I think that's pretty close to being within 2% of the budget. I mean, when you take a look at it, in fact, I remember going back to my first district, we were an $18 million district. And at the end of the year, we had $71,000 left, and that was really cutting the close. And I was sweating during the audit because I thought for sure we were going to go the other way. Yeah, so I feel comfortable that we turn the corner for our budgeting process here in the district. I think we're close, 2%. We can use this number to kind of work towards next year as a starting point.
Mr. Menuda.
So, building a couple of those questions, I would like to take this back to Finance Committee and take a look at our surplus and find out where exactly we budgeted in those buckets so that we can appropriately perhaps do some of the things that you've suggested and perhaps some of them you've suggested.
One of the other things that was done during the year, we did a position control audit through Questar BOCEs out of Albany. We did identify roughly 18 to 20 positions that were in the budget. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the board had the foresight to create positions, and it was pretty much a wash coming through on that. Taking a look at that, I mean, we make great assumptions on this, on the district. If we don't fill a position during the year, or we use, we kind of squeeze the nickel and it goes out around the buffalo. You know, that's part of my job here is to make sure that we don't end up with, on the other side of the books where we actually show negative balance, which in the state size is, really look upon us very disappointing.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Madam President, that concludes my items.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. We're now at the section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments that is posted next to the sign-in sheet. We have nobody signed up right now for public discussion. Would anybody like to address the board on agenda items?
Good evening, and thanks for the attendance and projected populations of our schools. I have to compliment you. It's probably one of the more detailed and better ones I've seen that the district has commissioned, and it certainly provided a lot of meat for reading and for understanding, not just the schools themselves, but our community. And I appreciate the presentation. It certainly gave us a nice snapshot, but as I said, there's a lot more meat in here, and I took a look at it from a budgetary and financial point of view, and what it might be saying. I don't prove to be an expert, but just looking at it, I'm wondering, with a growing aging population in the community, what might this do to affect both the financing of the school and passing budgets? It talked about families, not only those over 40 and 55, but even being under financial stress and the effect this is having on their budgets at home. It talks about a growing population of people living in rental communities or apartments. If we continue on this path of building more rentals, if my information is correct, they are assessed at a lower rate or whatever, putting more burdens on privately owned homes and certain businesses. The other thing I noticed was that it talked about the concentration of students per square mile. And when you look at Newburgh and our surrounding towns, we have a concentration of 308 students per square mile compared to every district around us under 100. At 308 students per square mile, are we using our buildings effectively, and should we be thinking of possibly community schools rather than what we're trying, what we're still dealing with, the magnet system? Would this address some of the problems we're talking about in terms of school ownership, pride, a sense of belonging, family investments in their community, and also more direct contact with those families? If everyone in the surrounding few blocks went to the same school, families were talking about the same schools, the same programs, and feeling, they have a voice in that school collectively, as opposed to what I now see in my community, a dozen kids going to 5 different schools and parents just disconnected from each other because they share very little in common with some of the other families in the community. Another point I listened to and heard was, the decline in enrollment. And we certainly would like to see more students coming into the district, but looking at the data, that wish has not been fulfilled over the last 10 to 15 years.
So my next thought is, how do you explain rising taxes and rising budgets with declining enrollments that we've been seeing? Certainly over a year or two, that's not much of a difference, but if you would compare, I guess, in real dollars, you know, some people would have questions about why we're spending this much money to educate 1,000 less students. I think that needs to be addressed as well. And when you're looking at your plan to rebuild, improve schools, etc., I think you might want to, you should be paying attention to the enrollment figures for each school building and how it affects, the equity of services and resources we can give to each building. When you see some of these buildings are down in the 300-400 range, while others are up in the 800-900 range. And then you look at the students per class. There's a wide disparity there between one school and another school teaching the same grade levels. It's a case of, if we had two small schools built into one school, could we do better at class size? Could we do better at making sure there are full-time resources there, as well as support systems? I think you did a marvelous thing bringing up this study, and I would hope that you use it to the best of your abilities in planning not just this year's budget, but the capital project and the future, as far as you can see. Thank you very much.
Would anybody else like to address the board on agenda items? If not, we're going to move to committee reports. Personnel Committee, Ms. Prakash.
Yes, we met last week, and most of the things were on the docket tonight. We discussed the 21st century appointments and prior after-school appointments, Latino family literacy project appointments, after-school review and recovery appointments, team appointments, ELL Saturday appointments. And we're moving along with that. We also discussed the abolishment of the supervisor of operations and maintenance and the replacing that with a maintenance foreman that'll be on there tonight. That was basically what we did in personnel. Building and grounds, we had the painting schedule update. We had an update on the auto shop paint booth that's being put in at NFA Main. We had discussion of the lockdown drills that are going on and what can be done, in the future. And we also discussed for the future a driver/cleaners to take care of some of the problem we've had with getting van drivers. Also, we're in the process of making the schedules out for school visits, which will be coming out within the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Ms. Prakash, would you do curriculum committee? Do you feel okay to do that?
Curriculum.
Because Mr. Tivana was absent? Or
Yeah. let me
you want me to call on Ms. Felice? Could you do it, Ms. Felice? Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't have it written down.
Okay, Ms.
At Curriculum Committee, we discussed a series of resolutions, a total of 17 that are on tonight's docket. They include conference requests, field trip requests, and assorted materials for the after-school programs. We also shared with the board a report on bilingual and world language vacancies and the work that the district is doing to improve on that.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to my section, Resolution 5.1, to adopt policy on the second reading. It's number 5100, student attendance. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Yes, Mr. Stronach?
I didn't see a number in the actual policy, but is there a number of absences a student could have that disqualifies them from passing a class?
Mr. Forgy, can you answer?
Can you just, this,
Qualifies them from passing a class.
Disqualifies them from passing a
that is
class.
not in the policy.
So you could have a student that has 20 absences in a specific subject, but could pass the class.
think that's up to the teacher's grading policies.
Okay. There are other districts that do have a cutoff number. I just didn't know, have we ever had a cutoff number, or is it the discretion of the, I believe that in the policy it's up to the building principal.
So it sort of straddles a philosophical line, right? So there's probably a camp that says there may need to be a number. Another camp would argue that if a student can pass the class and still miss 20 days, that is fine. So I'm not sure what position the district is taking on that, but it's not in the policy.
Mr. Fortune?
I don't recall us having that in our grading practices or in our grading policy, secondary course grading policy. If that's something you would like us to have a conversation about in policy, I'm sure we can put that on the agenda.
So right now, it's up to the teacher to determine whether or not that student can pass the class.
Mr. Tabano?
There was such a policy in the past, so I don't know when it was abolished.
Yeah, there's not a seat time yet, there's so much seat time.
Seat time, I think, is different, but,
It is?
yeah.
Right, there's seat time that goes with regulations.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
There's a seat time requirement that goes with Part 100 regulations.
Okay.
And there's a required minute of instruction that you have to provide at the elementary, middle, and high school level. So that's the minutes of instruction. I don't recall it being, and Mr. Devano probably knows better than I do, I'll go back and look to see where there was a policy that had an attendance requirement in it for a grade to be assigned to a student. I'm not aware of it.
I believe there was, because I became aware of
Can you wait
it.
to be called on? I need.
Oh, yeah, I can do
Okay,
that.
thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as I said, I believe that it did exist at one time.
I know there was a participation thing that teachers could put into their grading, right? You could do a certain number of participation to be able to add that and just schedule it into your grades. Yes, Mr.
I'd be happy to do the research on it. I'll work with some of the high school, middle school, and elementary teachers, and maybe even talk to you after the meeting to point me in the right direction. But I'd happy to do the research on that.
Mr. Stradine.
So if I'm understanding this correct, right now, the teacher has sole discretion of whether a student passes or fails in the class based on attendance.
That would be based on performance in the class.
Well, performance in the class, but there's no number of days that this teacher can say, well, it's out of my hands at this point, you're beyond 20 days. So the student can be absent half of the entire class, but as long as they do the work to the satisfaction of the teacher, that teacher can pass the student.
Mr. Ford?
I believe that's the grading practice that we currently have. But I will give a quick update that under ESSA, the plan that was approved by the state, by the federal U.S. Department of Education, includes a requirement of any student that's absent more than 10 days is defined as chronic absence. And the district now has to go back to our attendance policy where we define chronic absence and adjust that and talk about those particular things. But as far as assigning an attendance rate in a policy to a student's grade, I don't believe it's in any of our policies today. If you would like us to add that to the agenda at policy, we could definitely do some exploration after I do a little bit of research.
The reason why, I'm sorry.
Hold on. Ms. Prakash first, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I don't understand why we would even want to broach that. I mean, what is our job? Our job is to try to get kids to come to school. And if they're absent 20 days and the light goes on and they're going to start coming, I don't see that. I don't see what we're trying to do. We're trying to exclude. I mean, I think that our job, I'm talking as a teacher, because I don't think a teacher ends when they retire. But as a teacher, our job is to try to entice whatever way we can for students to come back to school if they are out, and it might be a family thing or whatever. And I would not want to be in a classroom where the kid's absent 20 days and all of a sudden we know that that child's not going to pass, and have that kid sit in a classroom knowing that they don't have a chance to get through. I think it behooves us to try to do whatever we can to entice kids to come back to school if they are out for whatever reason. But to put a policy in that if you're out so many days, you automatically are not going to pass. You think we have dropouts now? We're going to have even more if we have a policy like that. I think that's punitive.
Mr. Walker?
I believe that the policy would have to be very minutely defined I think a policy is needed. However, let's say, I'll make up a story. Let's say that you have a student who is an Olympic caliber athlete and will be gone for training for 2-3 months. I think that if that's possible, we should make arrangements between parents. Because it's not, it might be out 2 days, but it's bringing honor to the country and to the district as well.
Mr. Strickland?
In that situation, it would be an excused absence, which would be perfectly fine. I'm not saying it would be punitive as far as the total number. I'm just wondering if we had a number at some point. Because if you have a student that's absent 100, 200, whose responsibility is it to pass or fail? Does it still reside in the teacher's prerogative, or does it become an administrative process?
Mr. Forget and then Mr. Howard.
So if you take the component of passing or grading out of it, it's all of our responsibility to make sure that the students are attending. And as I just explained, under ESSA, we're going to have to put in attendance initiatives to ensure that students are attending. Because when I told you that the 10-day absence for any student, that's excused and unexcused. So any students that's absent 10 days, excused or unexcused, we're going to have to do some type of intervention or follow-up to support the student being at school, participating in school. The piece that, as of right now, that's not connected is the piece that's attached to grading that you're saying. That's something we'll explore, we'll do some research, as I said. But as far as following up on an attendance initiative, we have attendance teachers. We have SEL teams that work on that, and we're trying to improve the overall attendance of students in the district through that. But it's not attached to a grade.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President, I'm really trying to understand the intent of the question. So right now, that decision is in the hands of the teacher who best understands, who best knows that student. So is the intent to take that away from the teachers?
No, I just wanted to know whose responsibility it was, so that if it does come to a point where we have a student with 100 absences, and that teacher knows that that student is not going to pass the class, that they are not, pressured to do anything that would make sure that, we want to make sure that the kid understands. We want to make sure that it's not going to be 20 drops. I just want to make sure that it's the teacher's discretion to pass or fail, that remains the case. It's not a drop-dead number. It seems basically, over the past couple of months working with the policy, that the administration is going to take the steps to intervene to help the student if they see a student is absent a certain number of times. That's a positive result of going through the policy line by line. So I just want to make sure that if you want to look at certain numbers, that's fine, but no intent to change the policy. I just brought up the question to find out who's ultimately responsible for the pass or fail. Is it taken out of the hands of the teacher? It seems like it's not, which is good.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're asking to have this done in policy, to have this looked at in policy? Now, I'm hearing one voice saying that, so I need to go around and see if everybody feels that we should do that. Yes, Madam President?
I'm sorry.
Okay. This is what I understand, because there was a lot of give and take.
Right.
That Mr. Forget is going to do research on, help me please?
Whether there was a previous policy that is no longer in existence that attached attendance to grading.
Okay?
It's a simple
Now,
issue.
how do you feel about that?
No, because I like what we have in place already.
Everybody feel about that? You saying no?
That's one best.
Okay. Sue, what are you saying? Okay, so that's 3 no's. Mr. Stradar?
Yes, just to answer a question.
Okay, Mr. Tavano?
Well, I was going to make a comment.
Go ahead, make a comment, tell me yes or no.
I don't understand what Mr. Straight Island was talking about. He was a little confused, maybe distracted. Thank God he wasn't my teacher because I would have lost him. But
Okay.
he was asking a question, who's it up to, the teacher or the administrator to pass the student? After teaching 30 years, it's not up to the teacher or the students to pass the students, it's up to the students if he passes himself. If he's absent, he comes in and he's able to do the work, he's going to pass. So nobody's going to go there and try to fail or pass the student. The student passes or fails himself. And now, what did you want me to vote on, yes or no? Because I was lost.
That if Mr. Forget would look into, come on, help me again.
The policy will attach attendance to grading.
Okay, yes or no?
Yeah, you do.
No, Mr. Tavano?
No.
No, okay.
Yes.
I say no. So that goes down.
5 no's.
Okay. So, don't do that. And then we'll bring it up in policy if you need to do something else with it. But, okay, so on the floor, we have a motion, and we have a second. We've had lots of questions and discussion on the student attendance policy. Can I have a roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Howard? Yes. Ms. Beneo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda? Yes, please. Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strideyer?
Yes.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on to the deputy superintendent, Mr. Forget.
And what I did this evening, recommendation for the CSE, CPSE committees.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved. Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Beneo?
Yes?
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop? Mr. Strideyer?
Yes.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes.
That concludes my item.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. We're going to move on to the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Mrs. Felice.
Good evening, Madam President. This evening, it is request to submit items 7.1 through 7.17 as a consent agenda.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So
Yes.
moved. Second.
Wait. Go ahead, Mr. Stern.
Number 17, please.
7.17 to be taken out.
Be separated out.
Okay, thank you. So now I entertain a motion on the others, except for 7.17.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion on any of the others besides that one? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strideyer?
Yes.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Ms. Beneo?
Yes. Now we're going to move to item 7.17. I'd like to have a motion, please.
So moved. Second.
Okay, questions or discussion? Yes, Mr. Strideyer.
Could we have an explanation of exactly what this is? Is it similar to I Read, I Ready, but it's a math concern?
Go ahead.
Thank you. This expenditure, or this proposed expenditure, is for professional development to support 3 schools in piloting a math program that would support early numeracy.
I believe we did a pilot on I Read and I Ready. It's a similar to this, and then it rolled out into all the schools. So is this similar to Irene already as far as the way you envision it, as far as a supplemental program?
No, this was the plant math instruction,
This is an entirely new curriculum.
curriculum resource that supports our curriculum.
And has this been vetted out? I mean, where did this come from?
This is why we're piloting at the 3 schools, so we can receive feedback from both administrators and teachers for grades K through 5 before we move forward with scaling.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt-Iron?
Yes.
Mr. Tabano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
No.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes our items.
Thank you, Mrs. Fleece. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Mr. Kern.
Good evening, Madam President. Finance would like to present 3 items tonight in the consent agenda, items 8.1 through 8.3.
Would any member like to separate out any item?
Yes, 8.1.
Okay, so I'd like to entertain a motion on 8.2 and 8.3.
So move. Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll, yes, sir.
On 8.3, do we know how many properties currently are considered commercial properties that would possibly qualify for this? And then, as a follow-up, the city of Newburgh is redoing their master plan. Do we know if the commercial residential mix is going to be increased as part of that master plan?
Answer to number 2 is I have not heard anything from the city of what the master plan is going to be. On that, what the new mix is going to be. Question 1, conversation with the tax assessor today. There's roughly about 7,000 properties in the city of Newburgh. Somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 are purely residential. The rest are commercial properties, roughly about 2,200 properties in the city. Not all of them, anyone that had commercial and residential in it are not qualified for this. At this point here, the law's been on the books since 2001, and one property has applied for it and granted the tax exemption.
Mr. Menuda.
I'd like to separate all these out because I definitely can't vote for 8.2 and 8.3. Listen, it's a 45A. 45Bs are already throughout the entire area. 45A, all it does is takes an existing property or property that's going to be improved, they stay the same tax rate, whatever their improvement is, they get an abatement on it. So it's an incentive to improve that property. And then they're paying their full boat in this particular plan about 12 years after it begins. So at the end of the day, anybody who wants to make these improvements can do that, and it's an incentive for you to do that. It's also regulated in the fact that you have a set amount of time, and your money depends on how much you're going to invest in it, period. So it's your own dollar and a set amount of time, versus what we've seen in other cases where we got to go ring around the rosy for a year. So this is a very self-executing plan, if you will. And so there might be 7,000 properties, doesn't mean 7,000 properties are going to, take up on this. I hope they do, because if they do, that means we just improve the area greatly.
Now, in order to separate those out, Mr. Howard has to rescind his motion on the thing. So you want to rescind? Okay, so let's start with 8.1 then. We're going for 8.1. I'd like to entertain a motion on 8.1. Questions or discussion? Now, Ms. Prakash.
Yes, I just had a question on the corrective action plan. I read it over several times, and it's to be very convoluted. I like to see an action plan that is step by step exactly what needs to be done. So could we table this until,
Go ahead, say if you want to table it.
please?
Can I have a motion to table? Can I have a second? Roll call, Mr. Clerk. This is to table 8.1.
Mr. Strittmatter?
Yes.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Beneo?
Yes?
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes. Now we're going to move to 8.2. May I have a motion, please? Questions or discussion on 8.2? Roll call, Mr. Clerk, on 8.2.
Mr. Tavano?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Howard? Ms. Beneo?
Yes?
Mr. Menuda?
This is why I want to table, absolutely not.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Strittmatter?
Now we're going to move to 8.3. I would like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion on 8.3? Yes, sir.
During the first 8 years of no additional taxes on the property while it's being developed, will that tax burden be shifted to the existing city of Newburgh residents?
Kind of formulate the answer here because it's, if we don't have, I'm going to answer it in a different way. If we don't have an improvement on the property, the taxes remain the same with the city of Newburgh property owners.
But the assessment will be higher during the first 8 years. Will that difference in assessment be shifted to the rest of the taxpayers to make up during those 8 years?
There is no assessment change on the property during those 8 years. So if the property was assessed for $100,000, the taxes paid on the $100,000 will continue for those 8 years. In the 9th year, 25% of the improvement will be added into the assessment. So the assessment doesn't increase until they hit the 9th year.
So it could be a mixed-use building, fully complete, but the assessment still stays at the original year zero rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any other, yes?
I'm not sure I understand what residential commercial means. That one building that is one building that forms two different functions?
It's what they call mixed use. So like the project that came before the board was the Mr. Kaplan's Regal Bag Company. He's going to take a commercial property and have commercial part of it, and then residential is the other part of it. And he would be qualified for the 485A exemption in the district. The original assessment of the building would remain the same. He would be paying the same taxes for the first 8 years. In the 9th year, any even improvements that he makes to the building, 25% of that would go on to the assessment roll until year 12, when it would be 100%, and then taxes would keep coming into the district. So you're not in the case of the IDA where you're paying into a pot, but you're still paying into the assessed value of the property that you have taxes.
And this is with the Regal Bag?
This is one of the properties.
Specifically for?
This is one of the properties that's eligible for that.
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so mixed use. It's commercial on the ground floor, somebody has a deli, right? They live upstairs, that's mixed use. So they make the improvement on the property.
I can't hear you.
They make the improvement on the property. So let's say they invest $100,000. Property's worth $100,000. They're only being assessed on the first $100,000 for a certain period of time. After so many years, which says right here, 1 through 8, there's an exemption on the $100,000 that they invested, not the $100,000 that's already there, right? So it's an incentive. They're not going to be taxed on the money that they just put in, right?
Right.
So at that point, the property's been approved. At year number 9, right? Is that where we're at? Year number 9? We start seeing them to start paying on that $100,000 investment that they made. Make sense?
Yeah.
And this is any property, period. Okay, mom and pop shop, big one. Whatever.
We'll qualify that with that the existing property that already has commercial and residential is not eligible for this plan. So this is anything that has no residential and that's either commercial or industrial that changes to a mixed use. So you're taking a look at all the storefronts up Broadway and Main Street there that don't qualify for that. So it cuts a lot of the commercial property out.
And that's also vacant land or a building. Any improvement, period.
Okay. So, I hate to say this, any more questions or comments? Okay. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker.
Of course.
No.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Menuda.
Let me think about this, yes.
Ms. Prokop.
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron.
Yes.
Mr. Tabano.
Yes.
Madam President, that concludes the items from finance for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. We move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McElmore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the agenda, items 9.1 through 9.9, on the consent agenda, we have for your consideration tonight.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Menuda.
Yes.
Ms. Prokop.
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron.
Yes.
Mr. Tabano.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mr. McElmore. We'll move on to the Clerk of the Board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of minutes from January 9th, 2018.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Menuda.
Yes.
Ms. Prokop.
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron.
Yes.
Mr. Tabano.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet next to the sign-in sheet. Would anybody like to address the board on non-agenda items? Thank you. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Menuda.
Yes.
Ms. Prokop.
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron.
Yes.
Mr. Tabano.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes.